Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so glad to have you with us this morning for Inside the Fossil Lab. This is the last in our series of these special webinars to explore the fossil lab. To view live closed captions in English, please click on the More button in Zoom. To view closed captions in Spanish, please click on the external link we have dropped in the chat. For our guests watching on YouTube, the link to closed captions in English and Spanish is in the video description below. My name is Agnes, and I work with the education team at the Brea Tar Pits. So as you can probably tell, I'm not at the museum right now. I'm at home, like many of you are. But we do still have some amazing staff that need to go into the museum to help take care of our fossils. So as I mentioned, we are going to hear from fossil preparator Connie Clark about the work she does inside the fossil lab. We'll learn how Connie conserves the fossils that we find in our excavation sites at our museum in Hancock Park. Hi there, Connie. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, hello. So yes, as you can see, I am not in the lab today. They're doing some work in the lab, so I'm actually at home, but that doesn't mean I can't talk about Zed. And Zed, as Agnes mentioned, thanks, is the most complete Columbian mammoth that we found here at the tar pits. So we have over 80% of them, and you can see on the skeleton diagram on the left, all the bits that are colored in are the bits that we found. And this includes the 2 tusks. So before we found Zed, the largest piece of mammoth tusk we found in our 100 years of excavating was about the size of a football. So Zed is a really, really extraordinary find for us. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about Zed, Columbian mammoths, and also the lab's work on the skull that we're doing right now to help conserve it. And so we can go to the next slide. So Columbian mammoths were around from about 1.6 million years ago to 10,000 years ago. And they were from like the northern bits of the US all the way down into Central America. And so these were big animals. They're about 14 feet tall at the shoulder. So that's sort of like if you stood on the top of a basketball hoop, where you're looking at, that would be around the mammoth's shoulder. And as you might notice, these are animals that are related to elephants. So we can actually look at modern day elephants to get a good look at what mammoths were like. So if we go to the next slide, we can see a nice comparison between Columbian mammoths and African elephants and another elephant relative, the American mastodon, now extinct. And on the right, you can sort of get an idea of a family tree of the proboscideans, or the elephants and their relatives. So at the very bottom, we have the Asian elephant. They're very closely related to mammoths, like the Columbian mammoth. And then right up, we have the African elephant. And then sort of the other extinct relatives in this proboscidean family. So because they're so closely related to elephants, we can learn a lot about them just by looking at elephants. And so we can move on to the next slide. So one of my favorite things about mammoths are their teeth. So mammoth teeth are a little bit different from ours. So our teeth, we have enamel on the outside of the teeth. So enamel is the hardest substance in the body. It's mostly mineral. And on the inside, we have dentin, which is a little bit softer. Mammoths, on the other hand, have these sort of big blocky teeth that are mostly dentin. And then if you can look at those little ovals in the teeth, those are bands of enamel, and they're called lofts. And so what happens is the enamel wears less than the dentin does. So it creates almost like a raised, bumpy surface. And those are really great for grinding plants, really tough plants like grasses and shrubs. And you can just imagine those 2 molars grinding against each other in the mouth, and they can really process that plant material that would otherwise be very hard to digest. In the right, that's me holding a cast or a replica of an entire mammoth molar in the lab. And so these are very big teeth, and they need to be big because grasses and plants are very, very tough to chew. And so they actually wear the tooth down. And so that big blocky tooth gets worn down over the course of the life. So at a time, mammoths may only have 4 teeth in the mouth, the 2 upper molars and the 2 lower molars, but they lose teeth just like we do. So if we go to the next slide, we can see on the far left, we've got the very first molar a mammoth has, that really tiny molar, and then right next to it is an adult molar. So mammoths actually go through 6 sets of molars in their life. And the way that they come in is a little bit different than ours. You know, we have our baby teeth and then we lose them and the adult teeth grow in from underneath. Mammoths almost work like a conveyor belt. So on the right, we have another mammoth found close by. This is Hayden. Hayden is a young mammoth that was found as part of the Purple Line construction. And Hayden's really nice because you can see in the close-up of Hayden's teeth, you can see the new molars coming in almost from behind the old molars. And so as these molars in the front or towards the bottom wear down, the molars in the back come in and they sort of like push them out the front. So this happens 6 times throughout the life of a mammoth. And we can actually use which stage or like which teeth are in the mammoth is a good way to sort of figure out the age. So we can compare it to modern day elephants. So, and how old an elephant is when their teeth come in. And so looking at modern day elephants and comparing it to Zed's teeth, we can tell that Zed is about 47 to 51 years old in African elephant years. So we don't know exactly for mammoths, but we think it's pretty much in the same range as for elephants, just because they're so closely related. And so this means that Zed is sort of in his middle ages. He's an adult, but yeah, he's on that last molar in his life. And we can go on to the next slide. And so we also have Zed's tusks, and tusks are a really great information source about mammoths as well. So just from the size of Zed's tusks, so one of his tusks is almost 10.5 feet long, and it's got a diameter of 9.5 inches, so around that big around. And so that puts him in the size range for a male mammoth. So male mammoths have bigger tusks than female mammoths. So we know Zed's a male, and we know he's in the middle ages just by looking at his teeth and his tusks. And tusks are also really cool because they grow, they start growing towards the face, and then the oldest bit of the tusk is at the very tip. And so they're constantly growing throughout life. So they're constantly depositing that tooth material dentin, and they're doing it in layers. And you can actually take an X-ray and look at those layers, and you can sort of tell how a mammoth is doing. So we can see on the right, we've got an X-ray of Zed's tusk. And so you can see the arrows are pointing to these yearly increment markers in the tusk. And so that's sort of the first order. So we can see the years of dentin deposition. And then we can even go smaller than that. So on the right of that, those are the smaller intervals, and each one of those bands with like a number on it represents a week in Zed's life. And so by looking at those dentin depositions and their thickness, we can see how Zed was doing. If he's doing well, he's depositing dentin, he's making more tusk. If he's not doing so well, he's not depositing it. So the last 7 weeks of his life, we could tell that Zed was not doing so well because his dentin bands are very, very thin. And so we think that's around where Zed was, maybe he had a soft tissue injury, he wasn't doing so well, and he just couldn't recover. So we can go on to the next slide. So Zed is not what we think of as our typical asphalt deposit. So Zed wasn't found in one of our more typical bone jumbles like block 81 shown in this picture here. So usually when we think of animals getting stuck at the tar pits, we think of an animal getting stuck in a seep and then attracting carnivores. And it ends up in this very heavily asphaltic sort of bone jumble. But Zed was found in a little bit of a different position. We can go on to the next slide. So here on the right, we have a quarry map. So this is how Zed was found as they were digging that parking lot in 2006. And so the different colors are the different parts of him. So we can see his skull and his jaw and his tusks in red and purple. So he wasn't found sort of, he's disarticulated. So if he was, like if his tusks were in his skull, we would say he was sort of articulated, but we do only find one individual element from each part. So we only have 2 tusks. So if we had 3 tusks, that would tell us we have at least 2 mammoths, but we only have 1 of each part, which means we're dealing with 1 individual, that is Zed. And so when we took him out, he was his own deposit, numbered deposit 11, and they actually put the individual elements of him in plaster jackets. So the picture on the left is Zed's skull jacket. So inside that plaster jacket is the skull, and that's just to help protect the fossil as it's coming out of the ground. So we can go on to the next slide. And Zed, we think, died in a stream environment, and we can tell that from all of these freshwater shells that we find in Zed's matrix. So on the left, this is actually bits of matrix in the skull that we've got in the lab, and you can see the little white parts, those are little freshwater shells from snails. And then on the right, those are some of the freshwater snails that we found from other bits of Zed's matrix. So we think he died in a stream bed, got covered up, and then the asphalt came up around him later. So we don't think he got stuck in the asphalt. If he got stuck in the asphalt, the deposition would be different, and the taphonomy, or the study of how he became a fossil, would be different. So we think he fell in a stream bed and then was later sort of preserved by asphalt. So we can go on to the next slide. Oh yeah, so those are Zed's tusks. They're on display in the museum, and you can see one of his tusks is still in the plaster jacket, whereas the other one is partially out of the plaster jacket, and that little hole right there is where we took that sample to look at his tusk. So if we go to the next slide. Yes, so this is that little sample we took of the tusk, and then the x-ray of that, and that's how we figured out that's how we learned more about Zed, just by looking at that tusk in the yearly increments and the weekly increments of that dentin deposition. So we can learn a lot about Zed just from his head, his teeth, and his tusks. And so it's a really great opportunity to learn more just about one individual mammoth. And it's a unique opportunity that we have because we have so much of Zed. So we can go on to the next slide, and we'll talk just about his skull and sort of the conservation work that we're doing right now in the lab. Just to provide a little bit of orientation, we're looking at Zed's skull sort of like upside down, almost like he's at the dentist. So you can see where his tusks are housed here in the front. And then you can see above that are his upper molars, or his teeth. And then towards the back, those 2 little humps right there, that's where the first vertebra of the neck connects. So that's sort of the back of the head. And you might have noticed on our skeleton diagram of Zed that the top half of his skull is missing. Unfortunately, that's how they found Zed. So when they were digging that parking lot, they were going foot by foot, and they actually ran right into the top of his head. So we do have the pieces of it, but it's not together with the rest of the skull. And it's better that it's the top of the head than the teeth, because we can learn a lot from the teeth. So we'd much rather the top of the head get crushed than the teeth. So we got lucky in that way. Yes, so that's Zed in the lab. And the work we're doing on Zed is we're doing a couple different things. One of them is cleanup. So Zed is still to this day leaking a little bit of asphalt. You can see sort of those drips coming off of Zed. And so part of what we're doing is we're using a degreasing solvent called Novec to help remove some of that asphalt. And so you can see underneath one of our molars where, thanks Agnes, is pointing out that area where there's a lot of asphalt. And so after about 40 minutes with Novec, it looks more like the bottom picture where we've managed to get closer to the bone surface. So we can go to the next slide. This is an important step because it helps us with later stages like glue. So here's one of the parts where the tusks are housed, the side view of it. And so you can see on the left that it's very cracked, and we've got this asphalt sort of over the cracks. And so we can clean that asphalt off and expose the bone around the crack. And so that way, when we put glue down to help fix it, it sticks better. Yeah. And so we can move on to the next slide. And so we have one big repair to do on Zed. His cheekbone, a piece of it is broken off. And so it's right now it's not repaired, but it's lying right on a sandbag right next to him. And I've sort of held it up to where it should be on the cheekbone in this picture right here. So that's on our to-do list, is to fix that cheekbone. And we can go to the next slide. Part of what we're also doing is we're removing old glue. So when Zed was first worked on, the lab was still using Elmer's or white glue. And so Elmer's doesn't have a very long shelf life. It's only a couple decades and then it starts to break down. And the glue we use now, called Paraloid, has a shelf life of a couple hundred years. So it'll last a lot longer. So we're just removing that white glue with some water, and then we can replace it with Paraloid. So you can see on the left, it's those white patches of the Elmer's glue. And then on the right, that's some of the glue that we've, some of the cracks where we've removed that glue, so we can replace it with Paraloid. Yes, we can go on to the next slide. And finally, we've got the teeth. So these teeth are very, very heavy. And so we're worried that they're putting a lot of force on sort of this more delicate bone of the jaw. And so right now, the teeth are resting on these white ethofoam blocks to help give it a little bit of support. But in the future, we want to remove those blocks and give those teeth a bit more support with something called Kozo paper and Paraloid. And so I think we could end the slideshow. Thank you. Yes, so I've got some Kozo paper right here. It looks very thin and delicate. It's a conservation paper made of mulberry fibers. And so when you put glue on it, all of these little tangled fibers become much stronger and they act sort of like a bandage. So if I rip it, you can see some of those fibers. And with glue, each one of those becomes like a little anchor point, and it helps strengthen that glue bond to that glue bond in the fossil. And so I've made a couple demos for here at home. So here's a shell or a shell piece that I broke, and it's in 4 pieces. So each one of these parts is in 2 pieces. One of them I repaired just with the glue, and one of them I repaired with the Kozo paper. And the nice thing about Kozo paper is that with the, with glue, the Kozo paper becomes almost invisible. So the one that I repaired with Kozo paper is this piece right here. And it's really hard to see that paper now. Sort of almost really hard to pick up. This one is one without, and it looks pretty similar to the one with. So it's a really nice tool for us here in the lab. And I've repaired another shell with Kozo paper. This shell is in 6 pieces, and 3 of the pieces I've repaired with Kozo paper, and 3 of them I haven't. And it is almost undetectable on the shell, but 3 places I've repaired it are this little break right here, this break right here, and this break here. And so to demonstrate, I'm going to try to break this shell. This is sort of untested by putting it under this heavy book. So not sure how this is going to work. Let's see. Okay. Well, okay. So, all right. Okay. So it broke a little bit, and let's see. This is one of the bits without Kozo paper. So the Kozo paper that was right here and here has held up pretty well, a little bit broken. The Kozo paper right here is held up well, but the bits without the Kozo paper, yeah. This joint is actually doing pretty well without Kozo, but these 2, that's sort of just the glue, it's had the most catastrophic breakage. So, okay, the Kozo paper seems to work pretty well. Yeah, so that's how we're going to support those really heavy teeth in Zed with that Kozo paper. So with that, I think I'll try to take some questions. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Connie. That's fascinating. We love Zed at the museum. He's pretty special for us. So lots of curious students, lots of questions. I love that demonstration of the Kozo paper. That's fabulous. And some students were even amazed that we used Elmer's glue, because, you know, students use that in classrooms. So there's a lot of real life things that we do at the museum that maybe students don't know. So a couple of questions about Zed. You talked about finding all kind of like the hard bits of Zed, right? The skull and the teeth and the tusks. Do we ever find anything soft? Like Elijah wanted to know if we know how big his heart was, or if we find any soft tissue.
Oh, that's a great question. So we don't find soft tissue here at the tar pits. There's little microbes in asphalt that usually eat up the soft tissue, and also just generally the soft tissue tends to decay even in sort of that streamy environment that preserves Zed. So we don't unfortunately have any soft tissue bits of Zed, but we have found woolly, or not we, but in the world there have been woolly mammoths that have been preserved in permafrost, and that's ice. So they have soft tissue preserved. And so we can know sort of about the soft tissues of woolly mammoths from those specimens that have been preserved in ice. But no, here at the tar pits, we don't preserve the soft tissues, just the hard bones and teeth. Yeah.
And the tusks, which is lucky for us too. And talking about the tusks, Zachary was asking, are Zed's tusks hollow?
Oh, so only a bit of Zed's tusk is hollow. So the bit closest to the base where it's actively growing has it's called a pulp cavity. So it's sort of that soft tissue that helps, that creates that new tooth. So that's decayed away over time. So that bit's hollow, but the rest of the tooth is solid dentin. So it's very, very heavy. So the tusks usually on display that were hanging from our Columbian mammoth that we have in the museum, those aren't real because they're just so heavy that it's really impossible to support them. Yeah.
And then do we know what the tusks were used for? Some of our students are curious if they were used for defense because of how they look and how large they are.
Yeah, so that's one thing about, they're being so closely related to elephants, is that we can look at how elephants use their tusks, and that can sort of inform how we think mammoths use their tusks. So there is fossil evidence of mammoths fighting with their tusks, like male elephants fight with their tusks in dominance displays. So there's actually in Nebraska, there's fossil evidence of 2 male mammoths that have fought and got tangled together and then died. So we know that you're using these tusks for fighting, and we think they're using these tusks for, elephants today use their tusks to sort of like scrape up bark to get bark off trees to eat. So we think maybe mammoths did the same thing. They certainly could be used in defense. Yeah, so sort of looking at what we can find in the fossil record and what we can learn from modern elephants to try to figure out how they're using their tusks.
Perfect. So can we do that also thinking about behavior? Some of our students were curious if Zed had a family.
Oh,
we're social animals based on extant animals today, looking again at fossils.
Yeah, so just, we don't know if Zed in particular had a family, unfortunately, but there are other mammoth sites in the US and in the world that do sort of show evidence for families. So they'll have multiple individuals trapped at one time. And so that's a nice instance for like family structure. And elephants today do have family structures. They have sort of like a matrilineal herd. So it'll be older female elephants and their children banding together in a group, whereas the males sort of, once they're old enough, they sort of form their own little group, unless they sort of juvenile male mammoths. Yeah. So yeah, we can look at modern elephants, and we can also look at what we can find in the fossil record, both here and at other places. Yeah.
And then Sabrina is asking, we talked a lot about finding out the age of Zed and the health and cause of death. Does that only apply to this specimen, or do we do that with other fossils at the tar pits?
Yeah, so the Zed is very special because you can use those tusks as a really nice indicator for how he died, but we do try to do that with other fossils in the museum. So teeth are a really great way of getting age. So when we find fossils of animals that are sort of like in between growing and new teeth, so we sort of can get an age range for those animals as well. Zed's just really cool for us because we have so much of him. We're usually finding just individual elements, so we don't know if it's, like we'll find a direwolf femur next to like a coyote jaw, next to, maybe a bison leg. So it's hard for us to tell like where the rest of the individual is. But Zed was found all together. We have a lot of him. We can learn a lot about Zed that way. Yeah.
Very special. And our students are curious about the tusks because that's pretty special, right? So Zanvi was asking, about, not necessarily about Zed, but about its tusks. She says, or they say, I know that tusks are made of ivory, but what really is ivory and how does it feel? And are tusks from any animal made of ivory?
Oh yeah, so yeah, the tusk material is referred to as ivory, and ivory is that dentin or that tooth material, and so yes, that is usually referred to as ivory, but ivory is just that tooth material, that dentin. And sorry, there was another part of that question that I might have missed.
How does ivory feel? What does it feel like?
Oh, that's a good question. It feels I don't actually know if I myself have touched Zed's tusk. I have touched other teeth though, and dentin, and it feels sort of smooth and hard. Yeah.
Kind of maybe like her teeth after we brushed them and they're really clean. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I mean, that we're feeling the enamel then, but I would imagine the dentin feels pretty similar. Yeah. It's a good question though. Now I really want to touch Zed's tusk. I mean,
I know, right?
Yeah.
Get back into the museum and touch Zed's tusk. And then Peyton was asking, which actually a lot of students throughout these series have been asking is, how has COVID affected your research now that we're in this pandemic for the last year?
Yeah, so we haven't been able to get into the lab as much as we'd like, and we're not able to have volunteers, which is, for us in the lab, we had, I think, 70 volunteers. So that's people coming in 1 day a week. But that's a really huge, they do a lot. And, without them, like, it's really slowed down. And so we miss them and things are going a lot slower, but we're trying sort of the best that we can to continue with preparing fossils and some of our research projects. I mentioned that we're cleaning Zed with Novec. That's sort of the result of a research project with Stephanie Pozzo, the lab manager, and my colleague Stevie Morley. So they were testing out these different solvents and they identified Novec as one of them. So we managed to continue some of that investigation into the pandemic. But yes, it's really, we've been slowed down and yeah.
Yeah, we all have. And then last question is, we're running out of time, Connie. This is the last one that we're doing with you today. And looking back on all of these inside the fossil labs, do you have a favorite presentation that you had or something you want to share with our students today about this series?
Oh man, this series has been so much fun. I don't usually get to present, especially with the museum being closed. Our usual weekly presentations were sort of put on hold. So it's really fun to do sort of these presentations and these sort of deeper dives. I really like all the ones we've done. I think the intro with the lab manager, Stephanie Pozzo, is just a really great overview of everything we do in the lab. But I am myself especially fond of the one on asphalt, just because I think asphalt is so weird and cool. So yeah.
For sure. It is for sure. Well, thank you, Connie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I am going to wrap it up and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thanks, Connie.
Thank you.
So thank you to our friends and all of our students for joining us this morning. I certainly learned a lot. I love Zed. We learned a lot about Zed, what happens to our fossils after we excavate them, and about conservation in our fossil lab. So if you want to see more from our fossil preparators, please give them a follow on Instagram. Their handle is @Brea Tar Pits. We also have the videos from these presentations for all of them on our YouTube channel for you to watch later. So you can catch this recording and others at youtube.com/Brea Tar Pits. So again, thank you for joining us. And thank you to Connie and Steph for showing us behind the scenes and sharing your time with us over the past couple of months. We hoped everyone enjoyed watching this series as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. We also hope that we will see everyone back in the museum again soon. Take care.